Good morning. Today is Monday. Happy President's Day to those who are marking the day and where were you doing that? Try to leave a holiday off work. Um, Today's shiur, we're learning Perek Beitzah. Today's shiur is Lila Nishmas Aaron Nachman Simcha Koyin Yoshua Mordechai Ben Shtef Bracha Seb Shmuel Lev Moshe Ben Yosef Ben Eshel Zahav Aliyah and Fuhr Shleimach Ad Asar Basleach Chana Pesel Pacienta Yisrael Ben Rachel Leah Rachel Bas Pesel Zelda Aaron Yitzchak Ben Risha Chai Bas Dobebele Fuhr Shleimach So Shach Chol Yisrael. And there's a schus for Natalie Tzvi Ben Rivka Blima and Shalom Yehuda Ben Chayesar Mindel Schaefer Bracha Baslacha and all their endeavors. Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph Yom Tov. We're talking about, Beitzah was we're talking about Yom Tov, obviously, and also good Erev Rosh Chodesh today. It's Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar. Can't forget that. That's important too. Yom Tov Shechal Liyos Erev Shabbos. Now we're talking about Yom Tov that fell on Friday. So you're not allowed to cook from one day of Yom Tov to Shabbos, one day of Yom Tov to another Yom Tov. Only if the only way you could do that is if you began the process of cooking from Erev Yom Tov, and that's through the Erev Tavshilin. So the Chacham decreed that when Yom Tov falls on Friday, Lo Yivashel B'Tchila MiYom Tov Shabbos. One may not begin cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Rather, he may cook only what he actually needs for Yom Tov, and if he left over any food from Yom Tov, then he can use it for Shabbos. However, one may prepare a cooked dish before Yom Tov for Shabbos and rely on it to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Since he began preparing the food before Yom Tov, then the Chachamim permitted him to continue doing so on Yom Tov for Shabbos. This is called the Erev Tashilin, as we all know, because we do this every time that Yom Tov falls before Shabbos. Beishamai Omer Shnei Tavshilin. Beishamai says two cooked dishes are required since you need at least two cooked dishes are usually eaten at a Shabbos meal. Person cannot be viewed as having started to prepare Shabbos unless he could cook two dishes. Beis Hillel Omer Tavshil Echad. Beis Hillel says one cooked dish is enough because sometimes only one cooked dish is eaten by a Shabbos meal. V'shavim b'dag Beitzah she'alav she'en shnei tavshilin. And all agree, even Beis Shammai, that fish broiled with egg on top is considered two cooked dishes with respect to an erev tashilin, even though they are cooked together. Achlu or sha'avad, if it was eaten or lost before you start cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos, lo yivashal b'tchila. One may not rely on that cooked dish to begin cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Imi shiur mimena kosher. However, if some of it remained, some halal the Shabbos, he may rely on what remains to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Mishnah Beis Chal Yosachar Shabbos, when Yom Tov falls on the day after Shabbos, meaning Sunday. Beis Shammai says, "Matfilin esakol b'fnei Shabbos." We must immerse everything, people and utensils in the mikvah before Shabbos meaning on Friday. Immersing them on Shabbos or Yom Tov is aser because it's considered to be tikkun kli, and you can't do that. Here we're talking about a person going to the mikvah before Yom Tov and before Shabbos. Beis Hillel says, "Kelim b'fnei Shabbos." Utensils must indeed be toveled before Shabbos for the same reason of given above, because it's tikkun kli. Other Shabbos, but a person may go to the mikvah on Shabbos, because doing so does not give the appearance of tikkun kli. If a person goes to the mikvah, it can appear as if he's merely cooling himself off or enjoying a bath and not making himself tahor. Then again, why are you going to the mikvah for? I guess that's a cooler for taking a shower. We don't shower in showers anyways. Okay. Mishnah Gimel, V'shavin shebemashkin asamayim, V'shavin shebemashkin asamayim b'chli even l'tara. We agree that on Shabbos Yom Tov we may bring tummy water that is in a stone utensil into contact with mikvah water to make the water tahor. because making water tahor is not considered tikkun kli, preparing a utensil. The container must be made of stone, because stone utensils do not become tummy. Avalom matbilin, but we may not put the tummy water in the tummy utensil and immerse it, and thereby purify the utensil along with the water, as it is usher to purify a utensil on Shabbos and Yom Tov, as we just learned. But matrilin migav agav, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, we may immerse the utensil in order to take it from being tahor for a less sacred purpose to being tahor for more. To more, because you go from less kedusha to a greater kedusha. Since mikvah this type merely increases the utensil's level of tahara and does not change the utensil from tummy to tahor, does not resemble tikkun kli. Meaning, for a utensil that had been told before Yontif for the purpose of using it with truma, and then a Yontif, its owner wants to immerse it again so he can use it with kachim, which is more kadosh. So even though this tefillah is a chiyuv, it is not considered tikkun kli because it does not remove any tumah, but merely adds tahara. Very interesting. See, we in America, we towel our kelim like once when we get them, they're brand new. I didn't, doing this tefillah between truma and kachim. That's very cool. Beishamai omim, Mishnah Dal. Beishamai omim. Beishamai says, "Mavian shlamim ve'en samcha aleim." So we're talking about the concept of smicha. When you came up to Ola Regel, you brought the Ola Sfi'iyah and the Shamay Chagiga, which we're going to talk about and more in Chagiga in a couple of weeks. The Ola Sfi'iyah is a korban Ola, which is burned entirely on the Mizbeach, and the Shamay Chagiga is a shlamim offering, whose meat is eaten by the owner, his family, and guests. Like all the other personal karbanos, these karbanos require smicha. When you're leaning on the animal and you're doing a vidur or something, you put it before the shechita. You lean on the animal, and so the question is, can you bring these on Yontif, and whether you could do smicha on Yontif or not? So Beishamai says, you can bring the shlamim on Yontif because you eat the meat on Yontif, but you cannot perform smicha on them because leaning on an animal is aser the rabbanan on Yontif. Much like you can't ride an animal, but you also can't lean on an animal. But we may not bring a korban ola on Yontif because they're not eaten, but they're entirely burnt. Beitzah says, "Maviin shlamim ve'olos v'samcha aleim." Beitzah says you can bring both a korban shlamim and a korban ola, because there's a din d'oraisa to do this. When the pasuk says, "Atzeres l'Hashem Elokecha," it's a festival for Hashem. So how do you commemorate the festivals? By bringing karbanos. And therefore, the Mishnah relies on that pasuk to say that personal karbanos are also brought because of the chag. Right, but okay, the personal karbanos that are brought because of the chag can be brought on Yontif, but any other personal shlamim cannot be brought on Yontif. Any other personal karbanos that are not the same the chag, let's say korban chatos or shami simcha or korban toda, whatever it is, those cannot be brought on Yontif. Only the ones that are the same Yontif can be brought on Yontif. Yeah, and according to Beitzah, you also do smicha on them as well. That's part of the korban of Yontif. Mishnah Hey. Now we're talking about heating up water. Beishamai says, "Lo yachim adam cham in the raglav ela im kain rui lishtia." A person may not heat water on Yontif to wash his feet unless the hot water is also fit to drink, because the malacha of cooking is a mutter on Yontif only for preparing food. The Beitzah matirim, the Beitzah says you can heat water on Yontif for this purpose because you know the word because you know the rule Chuchanam of the Sarah Chuchanam Shalot that any malach permitted for the sake of preparing food is also permitted for other needs as well. Also, Adam Madur Miskamim Kenegda for the same reason. A person may make a bonfire in Yom Tov and warm himself before. Could you imagine making a bonfire in Yom Tov? That'd be so cool. We don't do a lot of Omer, but I mean, people do like barbecues on Yom Tov, but Beis Hillel says you can make a bonfire. Maybe we'll do it this year. Not a bad idea. Okay, Mishnah Vav Shlosh Deram Rav Gamliel Machmir Kedivrei Beis Shammai. In three matters regarding Yom Tov, Rav Gamliel will stringently following the rules of Beis Shammai. Although Rav Gamliel descended from Hillel, he followed Beis Shammai in these three rulings. Ein Tomnin as a chamen Yom Tov Shabbos. We may not insulate a pot of hot water on Yom Tov for use on Shabbos, even if an Erev Tashilin had already been made, because the standard Erev Tashilin is not affected to permit insulating on Yom Tov for Shabbos. The Ein Zokvin is a menorah Yom Tov, and we may not reassemble the parts of a candlestick on Yom Tov because this resembles the malacha of bonap, which is usher on Yom Tov. They ain't often pita and geritzin ela rakika. We may not bake thick loaves, thick loaves of bread on Yom Tov if there are more than what's needed on Yom Tov, because it's usher, because it is usher on Yom Tov to expend more effort than necessary. Rather, we may bake only thin loaves, a few loaves that are actually needed. Unless I said the size of the loaf, like baking more than is necessary for Yom Tov. Rabban Gamliel said, in all the days of my father's household, they would not bake thick loaves of bread on Yom Tov, only thin loaves, therefore avoiding extra effort. They said to him, what shall we do with this minig of your father's house? It does not prove that baking thick loaves is generally prohibited. Because they were stringent in this matter for themselves. But they ruled leniently for all other people of Klal Yisrael, and allowed them to bake thick, multiple loaves of bread, and even to make coal-baked bread, which requires even greater effort. Coal-baked loaves were large doughs baked directly on coals. To bake them properly, a person had to make a very large pile of burning coals. Despite the additional effort required, Rabbi Gamliel's father permitted others to bake such bread on Yom Tov. Even though the members of his own household refrained from doing so, this does not indicate the halacha, but in this matter, they committed themselves personally to go beyond the requirements of the law. So there was the halacha for the Hamon Am, and then there was what did he actually do in his own private house. Mishnah Zayin, Avhu Omer Shlosh Dvarim Lahakol. In addition, he ruled more leniently than the Chacham and these three matters. He had three that he was machmir, and now three is going to be mekolan. The Chavdim Ben Hamitos, we may sweep food from between the couches on which people recline while eating. But there's little concern that in such an area one might fill in the small holes and thereby level the floor, which is a malacha of boneh. And we may place incense on burning coals in Yom Tov to emit a pleasant aroma, despite this being a malacha of kindling, because it increases one's joy on Yom Tov by having incense burning in the house. And we may prepare to roast a young goat together with its innards on Pesach night, because this is how the Pesach offering was roasted, and one therefore commemorates this offering. So Rabbi Gamliel actually disagrees with the Chachamim who forbid this practice, because one who eats a goat roasted this way at the Seder meal appears to be violating the prohibition of eating shchutei chutz, eating a korban outside of Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Gamliel did not go according to the Chachamim. The Chachamim Asrin, but the Chachamim answered these three acts. They answered sweeping between the couches because that might lead to filling in holes in the floor elsewhere in the house. And that's a problem. That's malacha. They also prohibited placing incense on burning coals because that is not the practice of ordinary people. That's not a davar shavach al nefesh. They're therefore not considered to be a yontif need, and they forbid roasting a young goat together with its innards on Pesach night because this was considered. This is what they did by the korban, and it would be considered shchutei chutz, which is usher. Mishnah Ches, Shlosha Devar Rebbe Lezer ben Azariah Matir Chacham Oisri, and Rebbe Lezer ben Azariah permits these three things, but the Chacham answered them. Another three coolers. Parasa Yotza B'Ratzuah Shabin Kaneh. His cow would go out on Shabbos into the public domain with a decorative ribbon between its horns, because in his view, a decorative ribbon is an item of clothing for a cow, so wearing it is not considered carrying. Umekardin as habehim yantaf. Any rules that we may curry can mean scratch and scrape the body of an animal with a fine-tooth metal comb on yantif, even though the sharp teeth of the comb might prick the animal and make it bleed, because result is not intended. And he rules that we may grind peppercorns in the small grinders that are made specifically for grinding them, even though the malacha grinding is generally usher on yantif. The Chum disagreed with Elazar ben Azariah. In their view, a cow may not be allowed to go in a public domain with a decorative ribbon caught between its horns, because they do not consider it an item of clothing. They prohibit currying an animal with a fine-tooth metal comb, because that might make the animal bleed. And they prohibit grinding peppercorns in a regular pepper grinder because doing so seems to go weak the activity. Moving on, Rabbi Yehuda says, we may not curry an animal with a fine-tooth metal comb on Yom Tov because it might make a bleeding wound in the animal. But we may curry with a blunt-toothed wooden comb because it will not make such a wound. However, the Chachamim said, "Af mekardin af lo mekartzufim." We may not curry with a metal comb or with a wooden comb, because if a wooden comb would be allowed, people might think that all combs are allowed, even the metal one. Two more to go. Mishnah Tes. The pepper grinder can become tamei even when disassembled into three main parts, because these parts are three independent utensils. Mishum clay kibo, the bottom part which holds the ground pepper can become tamei because it is a container. And Mishum kli matachos, the top part, the pestle with which the pepper is pounded, can become tamei because it is a metal utensil. And Mishum kli kavara, and the middle part, the mesh that sifts the ground peppers, while allowing the powder to fall through and retaining the larger bits above, can become tummy because it is a sieve. And all these things can be mekabel tummy. And finally, Mr. Yud, Agala Shalkatan Tamei Midrash, a child's toy wagon, contracts Tumas Midrash, because in Avatuma, if a child sits, it becomes an Avatuma if a child sits in it when he's a Zav, because it is made for a child to sit in. We need tell us with Shabbos, and it may be moved on Shabbos because it is not muksa. But it may not be dragged on Shabbos except over utensils, meaning clothing that cover the ground, because otherwise it will make a groove in the earth, which is prohibited under the malacha of plowing. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol hakelim ein negrarim. All heavy utensils, such as chairs or tables, may not be dragged over the ground because they make grooves in the earth. And chutz min ha'golim b'nei koveshes, except for a wagon which may be pulled directly along the ground, because it has wheels which do not make grooves in the earth, but merely roll over it and press it down. Okay, tomorrow we continue with Perek Gimel. a good Erev Chodesh, a good Chodesh, and have a wonderful day.